today's session. As always, we're going to give a few more minutes to the people to continue connecting.
Good afternoon to everyone. We are going to wait a few minutes for more people to join today's session. Welcome to everyone. Tal vez 15:05 es adecuado comenzar a los que tenemos GMT-03. Hi, hello, Miguel. Bienvenidos a los que se vienen sumando a la sesión del día de hoy. Estamos esperando algunos minutos.
Welcome to everyone who's connecting. We are going to wait for a few minutes more to get more attendees. We will begin in 3 minutes.
Aprovecho de recordar que tenemos interpretación simultánea.
Please remember that we have simultaneous interpretation for today's session.
As a reminder, we have simultaneous interpretation available for today's session. En 2 minutos comenzamos.
We will begin in 2 minutes.
One minute to start today's training session. Muy bien, siendo las 15:05 en esta parte.
It's already 3:05 in this part of the hemisphere, and now we can begin with today's training session. Welcome to all of the participants. I'm going to give you a little bit of context before giving the floor to today's speaker, and also before diving into this topic. And remember that the context of these training sessions that we are performing are under the convergence of the initiatives associated to interoperability between borders in order to mitigate the COVID-19. This is done with the IDB, with the PAHO, guided by the WHO and its strategic partners like Raxo. Today, and executed by us. We're in the last session in the second cycle. This cycle has been conformed by 4 sessions. Today, we're going to focus on a practical exercise to generate certificates. And remember that this is the end of the second cycle, but not the end of the the training sessions that we'll continue delivering to the participant countries in the different initiatives. We have 2 additional sessions for December. We already grouped them into a third cycle, a cycle that holds converging elements that are born from the LACPASS project. A tentative date for the first cycle would be December the 9th. We'll be accompanied by the Zoom International people in a presentation associated to the role of Node 10, associated to the IPS profile. It's going to be quite an interesting session. The usage of medical terms in this profile. And a second topic that the people from Snowden will be delivering to us. I think it's in December. It's going to be for the following week, after the 12th, I think. We'll give you the date afterwards. And this is going to, we want to show Snowstorm, an open source tool associated to the clinical terminologies for interoperability. And by the end of December, the last 2 weeks, it's going to be holiday, so it's going to be complicated to coordinate the agendas because we're going to go to January. The first and second weeks of January, we'll continue with these training cycles. We'll work with the WHO regarding the DID documents. This is another topic that's still pending about these decentralized identifiers and how they work within the DDCC realm. And after this, the development team from LACPASS will talk about the IPS. They'll be guiding the participant countries with the different initiatives regarding the profile and what the profile what's the content, and to work on the fast transactions. We're still missing, we're going to drill down those training sessions because they are going to be accompanied by the development of the team and delivery of enablers that will begin in December and in February. Those are 3 months where they're going to be working on this. And to finish this introduction, I would like to remind you of what we're looking for regardless of the initiative that you are participating in. After a conceptual test, we'll be able to test the DCC certificates. We'll also be able to test the patient summary, and we'll try and extend towards an immunization certificate from the IPS. This is under technical revision, and apparently we are trying to extend this, but the system's still under definition. So these are the 3 tracks and the 3 objectives of the requirements that we want to test. We also look for the support from EHI in order to formalize the work. Without any further ado, I'm going to give the floor to Alejandro Medina, our speaker for today, and he'll be presenting the workshop for today. So Alejandro, you have the floor. Good afternoon. I'm going to share my screen now. Please let me know if you can see the screen. Yes, positive. It's not in full screen, but we can see it. Good afternoon. Welcome. to this new presentation. The idea is to see the details of how to generate the DTCC certificate. We'll see a practical exercise. And the idea is for us to be able to understand that by using the repository and all the elements that have been shown before, and based on the information from the, we'll be able to get this to reach a effective generation of a certificate. The idea is for you to see the process on how to generate the certificate. And we'll identify some of the transactions that are defined in the implementation guide. And also the transactions of the guide that had several transactions that were defined. And the idea is for us to be able to identify them so that you can have a better understanding of how to generate the certificate and the whole process, underlying process of how of that work. So we have an existing tool from the WHO. We apply modifications in order to make it operational. And the idea is to use this tool in order to generate the certificate, and we add some additional elements that will allow us to execute other transactions. We'll see a summary of the transactions. We'll go over that really fast, and the idea is for us to just go over those transactions in the implementation guide. Also, we'll see an example of how to generate a certificate, a health card, that is also based on a transaction. We'll also give an example on how to obtain a certificate. And additional to this, we'll see an example of how to validate the signature within the application. This application is going to be available. Enrique is going to be here, and most likely you'll be able to download it from the web, from the internet. Currently, we are working on the documentation. That's the first thing that we revised, the data set. Then we saw the implementation guide. We identified certain elements that did not exist and had to be created. And part of the enablers had to do with the repository. So we created a guide. And Marcelo showed you in the last presentation how to install a server and how you can use it. Now you have to think that every time that the repository has a usage in this project, but you can also adapt it to other use cases, and it's a very powerful tool. And after installing the repository, you can define the use and implementation. And after having these elements, we can talk about the generation of a certificate, and we have to follow the data set and certain transactions, and to have a repository and implement the guide. This is a summary so that you can remember where we got all the documentation from. And we'll have the NIC here. That document is in English and Spanish. We have all the technical specs. The implementation guide, HL7 FAIR, which holds all the information that we saw here. And there's also a technical summary with very few pages that explain certain characteristics and traits that this project has with its specifications and what's the scope of this process. The data set that we saw, we're going to have the patient data, certificate data, vaccination data. We also delivered a spreadsheet to the participant countries so that they could see what was their competitiveness in relation to the data set that are requested by the DDCC. So the idea is for having this partially complete or complete, and in case it's not complete, we can generate, we can have a discussion about certain variables that do not exist or variables that just aren't included yet. The FAIR repository, the idea is to use this to hold all the documents and the certificates and other information. This is related to the decisions that every country takes or every implementer. We can save some information there and or we can just hold the certificates there or save all the structural information to use it in other ways. So that's going to depend on you. The implementation guide is in the link down there. The installation guide, I'm sorry, for the repository. And let's begin with the tool installation first. And this is going to be kind of technical in the beginning because I'm going to show how to do this. So first I'm going to share my code editor or a terminal, how we call it. And let's suppose that the repository already exists. However, I'm going to show you that it's not a hard thing to do. This is the code, and what we have here in these links is the mediator, and that's where the tool or the application will be installed for the certificates. Let's remember that this is part of the WHO project. It has the same name, but it's in our repository. And there are different editions or versions that include the interpretation given to the implementation guide and the technical specifications so that we can have an effective generation of a certificate. The idea is for you to download this repository and clone it and follow the instructions. In further meetings, we'll be able to see more details about this. If there's any issue or troubleshooting, we can help you to properly configure this application. I'm going to show you some details that this has. This is my repository. Please let me know if it's visible or not. Let's go directly to the repository. The instructions are in English and Spanish. And there you'll be able to have the information for configuration. This project uses Express. You have to play with several environmental variables and other elements. The prerequisites is for you to have Docker engine installed previously. This is for the repository also, so this can be used in both cases. And we also need to have a private key for signing these documents. This is an explanation on how to generate the private key. If you already have one, you can use that one. There's no problem with that. And how do you install this environment? The idea is for you to have the URL of the repository. If the repository exists, please include that environment variable. And with that, we could eventually install the repository. These are certain parameters in case you want to do it with an external repository, the one that has been previously installed. If you want to start from scratch, this project includes the pre-installed repository. So if you would like to install it in one step, it's also possible to do that. I'm going to focus on the second step. We're going to begin with an external repository, which is the most common case. And these are the instructions for activating and setting up the OpenHIM. This is similar to, I'm sorry, I did not get that. It has certain characteristics for publishing services. This service over here is publishing the OpenHIM, and we're going to see that so that you can add certain security traits, some complex, some not so much. But we decided to add a basic authentication so that you can take that decision and so that we don't impose anything upon you. So I'm going back to the code. I'm going to install a repository here. So we're going to compose this one, and remember that this, some of you already saw this. You saw in other presentations or in the direct meetings on how to create a service that is going to have a database, I'm sorry. And we'd also have a fair service. These are different configurations to be able to use the database that's been set up here. You're going to create a network, and this is going to be in the 8081 port. So I'm going to take, it's going to take 30 seconds to do this. We have to see the logo to see what's the status. And then we are going to go to the mediator. So first we're going to have the repository working, and then we'll go to the mediator. The mediator has several services. I'm going to show you the repository so that we can understand everything. There are different ways to do this. Remember that this is an existing project that we did, and we edited two elements. First, we can use OpenHIM, and then an OpenHIM with an external repository. This one does not include the first server, but it does include the mediator, the transaction mediator, which is what we were able to install in the last meetings. This is the first server. We also have a generation service. Service that is in charge of transforming resources. There was one that was there by default, but it did not work as we required it. So what we did is to implement a new generation service, and that's available, and you have the image down here. We also have the OpenHIM that requires of a console. It has a database. It does not consume so many resources. Just continue with the same requirements, and with the test, you won't have any issues with the test. And the resource generation service that transforms the resources. This is the image. You can download the image by running this compose. You'll be able to save this image. You'll be able to download it, and then you can set it up. And this version with external repo would be the ones that should be used by the teams that already have a server in place, a fair server. So let's show you how to do this and where to configure it. This is the configuration. This should be the base of the server. If you have local servers, there will be fir 8080 fir slash. That should be the environment variable. Now let's set up the service. These are the same elements that we were seeing before. This repository considers an environment variable. That should be our fir server. If the variable is not defined, the compose, it won't run because it's a mandatory variable. Therefore, we're going to put it up. The instructions are in the README file. Here are the instructions. So we're going to use the one that has an external repository. It should be up and running. There, here it says that the application started in 82 seconds. It wasn't 30, it was 80 seconds, sorry. And the repositories are already up and running. Now, I'm going to show you how to set it up for the project. It will include all the dependencies, and now we will have to wait for the service to go up. We're going to see the logo now, the log, I'm sorry. The logs. And this tells us that it's loading the private key. Here it is. You can see it over here. So that is for you to be able to follow these instructions, and we can troubleshoot any problems step by step during the meetings with the teams. The private key should be within this file with this name. And if you put another name, you'll have to edit the Docker compose that's here, the variable that's here. This project can be modified by yourselves. You can set your own rules with this. There are certain things that can be left as environment variables, and that's a possibility that you should take into account. And now all the services are up and running. We have the mediator, the OpenHIM, and also the generation service. All of them are running. This is the one that translates to the resources. And we also have on the other side, we have the application running too, our repository, data repository. I'm going to take a step back and would like to show some elements that we're going to see today. Part of the transaction summary has to do with the generation, which is produced via the submit health event, which is included in the implementation guide. It's done through a generation service that would be our mediator in this case. And we also have a storage service, the repository that you saw with Marcelo last week. There you can include the data. And the generation service use this in order to store all those resources there. In this case, you can additionally have another service, like for example, a registration service. And we did this as a demonstration. These are fair services. They're going to have a different reference, so they won't collide, they wouldn't affect each other. So we would have a generation service, that's the mediator, and the storage and registration services, which would be our fair repository. We will apply certain operations defined by MHD, like the ITI 68, the ITI 66. In the 66, we'll have the health file, where we'll have the registration of the certificates, and the 68 will have one. We can also have a discussion here in the ITI 68. The rules state that a certificate can be obtained, a DDCC document, but it's also possible, and it has to be done through the document reference. We'll see some pros and cons on how to obtain this, and if we have to define anything else. Another element that the generation service has is to do the registration via the ITI 65, and this is what gives life to both ITI 66 and 68. So the first thing is the post method. The route will have the DDCC service. We're going to see this directly in the OpenHIM. There you'll find you'll see the instructions on how to activate the OpenHIM. So I'm going to go to the OpenHIM. And I'm going to see some transactions that I've done previously. And we'll be able to see the mediator too. This is where it's registered. And these are the endpoints. The mediator service for the generation service is running in this port. And the channel is this one. We can see also the routes. And this is running under a defined port, and we can also see the transactions and certain audits and clients. So if you can go over this, it would be great. If you define how you want to use it, or if you want to use another one that's similar or with other characteristics, you can do it. But we are going to do the transactions via the OpenHIP on the meantime. Once this has been created, now I'm going to go to a postman, and the service is exposed here in the 4321 port. We'll access it via the OpenHIP through the port 5000. So in port 5000, we're going to see something similar to a proxy pass. The credentials will vary in other elements, and there's going to be a registration of the transaction in the port. And it'll send the petition to the 4321, which is the mediating port, or the port of the mediator for the generation service. Now let's go to the certificate generation. So we're going to have the post method. The route is going to be DDCC. The entry data will have a bundle resource with the questionnaire response. And for the people that have any problems generating that bundle or the questionnaire response, we have another guide for that that'll be shared with you very soon. Sonia, please let me know if this guide is already being shared. There it is for you to be able to see how this generation process takes place. So that you can get the data set, so that you understand the context of the transaction submit element. The entry bundle is going to include a questionnaire response. And this bundle has an example, which is the one that we're going to use. The questionnaire response has the minimum data set with a resource structure, that it's a questionnaire response DDCC, and it holds this structure in a bundle. It's a batch type with the response questionnaire that contains the data set to generate the certificate. And here we can see how an example would look. Once again, this is a resource type, would be bundle. All of this is included in the guide. Go over the details. Once again, the bundle resource type, which has this profile, it has to be a batch type, and the entry should include the elements, the name. All of this can be seen in the minimum data set, identifier field, and all of these data that are related to the patient, to the vaccine, and also information related to the certificate. So with all of these data, we'll be able to use this in the first certificate generation, which is the main one. And I'm going to show you here. Bundle. This is the profile, the type, batch, and it should hold a response questionnaire. All the variables are defined here, and with this, we'll be able to generate the certificate. So I think that the first time will take a little bit longer, because the repository will begin with the first petition. So let's send this, and let's pause for a second. Let's wait for a moment so that the certificate can be generated. The output would be the bundle type resource and the DDCCVS document. And we saw this in the previous presentations, but the summary is very simple. We'll take the data and it'll generate a QR code, and that element will transform the data to the DDCCVS document for a patient or for a document reference resource. There's also a composition document that will hold the definition of this document. And after that operation, the registration server will publish the ID 65, which is the one that we saw here, the ITI, I'm sorry. And it'll store the health certificate. So once the certificate has been generated, it'll sign it, it'll store it based on the location. And this has to do with the registration of the ITI 65. So based on this, we will be able to have certain functions. On the one side, we'll have the document, and the other side will have the reference of that document, the references of that document. Sorry. So let's see the generation. And this failed. Let me go over the data. This was within the plans. So let's go over the information. There might be a timeout there. Let's see the status of the server. Yes, it was a timeout. It took a long time for the repository to initiate. But we can see those details just in case. Let's remember that this only happens the first time when the servers are initiating. So you'll probably have to do a test transaction in order to begin certain operations. So let's see details of that transaction. We already went over some things that we can reuse. And let's actually use the OpenHIM before seeing this. Let's go see what happened in the OpenHIM. What was the log? Here it says that we had a problem with a transaction. This is what I wanted to show you. It tells us that there was that internal server error and that it took more than 60 seconds to do something. So that was the error. And that's how you can use OpenHIM. In this case, if I understand what was the error, I can rerun the transaction and I'll be able to obtain the result that I wanted in case the service did not respond properly. So this is a transaction that I just made and failed. So this is it. And this is the correct transaction that will hold our document, our DDCC VS document. So let's see the DDCC VS document, and this is the encapsulated within the structure so that the mediator understands what's happening. So in the case that you want to leave aside the OpenHIM, that means that we have to revise certain parts of the code and eliminate the structure and just leave the structure of the document. For that is for you to be able to understand that there are other ways to encapsulate these messages and to aggregate certain or to add certain security characteristics. I have a basic security here in this case, but it is for you to be able to have access to the OpenHIM and to add your own characteristics. So now we're going to have the DDCC document. I'm going to get this bundle here, which is the document. It's a bundle, and it has an identifier. Alejandro, we had someone raising their hand. Michelle. Hello, Alejandro. I wanted to ask you a question. The component where you are sending the request, that component is already doing the validation of the profile, or is this something that will be pending? Currently, we do not ensure that the structure will send the profile. But we did it as an experiment, and we validated the profile, and we just made sure that the document can send the profile. We're not doing this directly within the code, so we'd have to add those sections where you can do those validations directly. Now, those types of validations would be part of the validations that had to be done. We would have to do some verifications that the data is correct, that certain code would be what we expected, certain elements that are required for a validation to take place. Because what usually is validated would be the structure. And in some cases, you can validate certain data sets. So you have to consider these in two levels. At an experimental level, we have the validations of this document, and we can show here how we do the validation and which errors could arise or which warnings we can find. But we always make sure that this certificate should at least send the profile without any errors. There will always exist other elements to add. We have to work in the future to define the data sets. And this would be done via the feedback given to us by the participant countries. So we'll find several missing parameters or parameters that do not make any sense and that we have to leave them as optional and probably adapt the whole process so that we can continue working without those parameters. Thank you. I'm going to show you this resource. It's a bundle resource. It's a document type document, just like the profile said. It has an identifier. It has a link also, as it was shown in the profile. This is the HCID. It's the same one that was sent here. And we also have the definition of the composition. The composition is a resource that contains the relation of the relations or the information regarding the document. So if I go to the composition, I'll be able to see that it has a profile, the identifiers, the status, certain categories. These are elements that were being asked by the implementation guide, the reference of the patient, another reference for the author. Also, these are references of the organization. And this is the code. We have the focus. This would be the immunization resource that you can see below. These are more references that will be in the document. And this is the immunization recommendation and the document reference. So in the composition, which is what generates this document, this element would be the patient, which is the same one that's defined here. You can find this in the code. And we also have the patient definition, its identifier, the name, the gender, and it's pretty long. That's why I'm going to try to speed things up. You'll be able to see the details if you use the same tool. What other things are interesting here? It would be the document reference. That's where we have the JSON. This is a JSON in the 64 with the core data set. We also have the image. This will be the QR code. This is a QR code that uses the European standard. We also include the signature and the data serialization. This one's pretty long. And then we have the same QR, but in a PDF format. So we'll use this data and we'll be able to see what's the data it holds. So I'm going to take the data from the QR. I think I have a QR in my files. So let's try to use an existing library. I think there was one that could read the QR from the code. I think it's this one. And we also have the European library. This is an application that reads images from a QR with the same data. And we can decode the QR here. You'll take the header. Part of the data you can see here. It's 45. It applies the generation process, but backwards. Here, this is the definition of the CBOR. It also tells us about certain warnings. It says that this key ID that uses sign is unknown. Therefore, we cannot verify the data that uses a key that's generated. It is in my computer. And this is the core data set. This is the same data, but transformed to core data set data. That's the same data that we sent. So you can see it here. Obviously, this data could have been generated by anyone, because we always have to take into consideration that the key is unknown, so we cannot verify it. If we'd use a key that is registered properly, we would be able to verify the content. But here we are able to see that the core data set is in the QR code. It's coded, obviously, but it exists, it's there, and you'll be able to see it. I don't know if we can directly verify if the access, if it has a public access key, then you can do it. But this is the QR that should be attached in these documents that are delivered in a hard copy or that had to be stored.
Se escucha ruido, alguien está hablando.
Hola, Alejandro.
Sí,
Hello, Alejandro.
Entonces, el CIBOR está
So the CBOR is associated to the core data set?
sí.
Yes, correct. And that's what changes the structure. And under that logic, and if the dataset code would change, the effect would be the same in the end. In the end, it's a structure that has a signature, and it's going to use the structure that stores all these parameters in the CBOR. And you could do the same thing. If you go to the certificate of the European Union, you'll also be able to see this if you can upload the QR. You'll be able to see the structure of the European Union. It would be different, obviously. The B, the C, the R, all the elements that are defined with that structure. The D, the DDCC, yeah, correct.
Por eso es bien interesante. Nosotros eventualmente se podría en un futuro, obviamente, con una continuación de este proyecto, hacerse.
In the future, if we continue with this project, we could probably change the structure, and the effect would be the same. We would change the structure, but the process would be the same. Another important thing to take into account is that the DDCC document would be the QR, and the other format would be the DDCC document, where the data is transformed into resources. An organization resource, immunization resource, and it's all standardized. So this is what's going to happen. I'm going to eliminate some things from here. To make it smaller. To collapse it, not eliminate, I'm sorry. I'm doing this so that we can see the structure of the DDCC document. This is where you're going to receive a bundle, a document bundle with all the associated resources. And the most important part of this is that it'll arrive with a signature. And this code here would be the signature itself. This is the data under the FHIR standard, the FHIR standard, where we remove certain metadata, some narratives that are not important for the signature. These are removed, that you apply the signature operation is applied, and this would be the resulting code. I have another question. The signature is associated as a resource, or is it an element? Because it's part of the resource. Because the resources, I'm sorry, the signatures were in provenance. In provenance, it's not being used as a resource here. No, it's not being used as a resource. Probably in the future it can be done. Part of the modifications that we carried out were to, we could leave the signature in the provenance, but the idea was for the provenance would not be delivered in the digital solution. So we realized that the transactions were going to have a DDCC document without a signature. And originally, when the code started from scratch, that's what it did. So I'm going to show you part of those transactions. And one of the effects that it should have says that it shall generate and sign the DDCC document, and it shall return the generated signed document to the digital health solution. This is one of the things that provenance did not allow us to do, because in the end, we would deliver the DCC document and the signature would be in the provenance. They would be in different places, so the application would not validate if it was signed or not, or it couldn't verify the content unless it would have access to provenance. So it was a technical decision that we had to take. It could continue, but would have to change some things, for example, in the delivery of the document and also the signature with the provenance. So how this option looked like, so that we can understand that we're not it's going to see the DDCC document that we're using here. So let's do this so you can understand. This is the document, and one of the elements that this includes is a signature. So this would be an optional element. Now we included the signature within the document. And to sign the document, we have to eliminate certain elements. And we identified some elements, and we did this based on the standard. I'm going to try and show you this. So, and the narrative is removed. We can also remove the meta variable. And we can also remove other elements that make no sense. For example, the white space is another elements that make no sense for the certificate. So by doing this operation, sorry, the computer froze. By doing that operation, you calculate the hash of the document. The hash is signed, and the document ends up with a signed hash. The signature has to be done with the private key that will have to be included in the configuration. And this is the output, the document output. So we now have a document that's based on this. We have a DDCC document with a digital signature. So that's one of the things that we had to revise. There was something else that we had to recover this certificate to apply certain operations, the ones that we saw here. And for this, we have to have the file of this patient. So we're going to use the ITI 66 that we also implemented in this code. You can see here, this is to get the health file. This has a list with a search parameter where we include the HCID and the identifier. That's the identification of the vaccination. So we use this operation, we execute it, we execute the operation, and we get the list that will hold the search results of what it with this identifier, which is the file identifier. And within there, you'll find some things that we wanted to keep for a didactic purpose. One of these is the document reference that is related to the certificate that we generated. And another one is a PDF. That would be for the DCC or for the implementation. That document was just for a test, but it's going to be available nevertheless. Let's see if we can recover that document. But on the other hand, we have the document that will have the reference to the DDCC of that document that is the bundle, the document type bundle. So this operation is to recover references.
Vamos a tomar la primera.
So let's take the first one.
14.
I think that's 14.
La búsqueda anterior, el identifier, ese es del
The identifier is the one for the patient for the certificate. This is a vaccination status of the patient. Remember that the HCID is the master identifier for that vaccination. So every time that I consult this, we'll get to elements. If there's a second dose, we'll have 4 elements in this case. In this entry document reference, we'll have the reference of each one of the vaccinations that the patient has received.
Ya, perfecto, gracias.
Clear? Yes. The next execution would be the ITI 68. We have it here. The file, the health file, it's here. This uses the get method and the output data. It would be a bundle type resource based on the result criteria, the search result criteria, I'm sorry. The next step, it will be the ITI 68. Based on the MHD definition, we should obtain the certificate. And this, we use the document reference ID. And there's a small detail that could be related to interpretation. And regarding the ITI 68, or according to the ITI 68, it's not necessary to have the document reference. And this is a definition from the MHD. When searching the reference, we want to have the document, not the reference. So by giving this data and by calling the code, give me a second. Document 14, with this, we can obtain a document type bundle. You can say several things here. We can talk about a first server. We're setting a reference to a resource and we're obtaining another one. Yes, that could happen, but we should occupy another reference here in order to hold this process. What the ITI 60 said is said that with the identifier that we obtained from the search of the health file, we should not receive the reference because we wouldn't. What we're interested in getting is the content, and the content or that reference is the bundle. So with this code, we obtain the document reference. Now we're going to look for the attachment variable where the content is in, and we'll look for the bundle. That's what we get as an answer. So this is the same bundle that we saw during the generation process. It holds all of the elements and the third elements also. This is a QR. It's pretty long. And finally, we can see the same code here. So by using the ITI 68, we can finally recover the document with its signature. Do you have any doubts with the process so far? Please let me know. I didn't want to show code, so the idea is for you to be able to have access to this, to modify it, or just to use the code as a reference to generate other applications. And this is part of it. It depends. It's up to you what you want to do with it, but it's going to be possible. The code is going to be available. It's quite readable with simple definitions, and it can be reused, or you can use it only as a reference if you desire.
Luego de la obtención del
The
certificado,
next step after getting the certificate, and it's an experimental step, is to do the reverse process to validate the signature. This would be in case if you have a document, if you wanted to validate its structure. And for that, we implemented an operation where it does the reverse process. The entry will be a signed hash document. So we'll extract the hash. We will calculate a hash by removing the JSON, the metadata ID, and elements that makes no sense to calculate the signature.
Tiene que ser la operación contraria a lo que se hizo.
And the operation should
Y
be
vamos a hacer
done
la
in
comparación
reverse.
del hash y vamos a
Then
obtener el
we'll
resultado.
compare the hash and we'll obtain a result.
Así que con esto deberíamos
So,
entender este proceso.
having said this,
Entender
we
cuál es la
should be able to
consecuencia
understand the process,
correcta y podemos ejecutar esa
and that we
verificación.
are able to execute that verification too.
Que el mismo documento está completo, tiene el
This
QR,
is the whole document with the QR and all the definitions. This is the reference document, same
yo
bundle,
voy a enviarlo
document
a la
type,
verificación.
and I'm going to send this for the signature
Y
verification,
voy a obtener que el
and I
resultado
will
es true.
obtain the result that says true in this case. So we use a resource that's called parameters. The guide does not have this, so it depends on the who implements it. We just wanted to show a resource that can be used whenever you define certain operations. And we can also verify that this data is related to the signature that was sent. And this is the reverse process. And there's a log that's left here. In case you want to do the process, you'll be able to see part of the process of what's being done. What can we test here? If you do a signature verification where you make sure there is that the data has not been forged or modified, it also states who signed the document and confirms it. So we can get several things from this. If I modify this document, I'm going to validate once again. And this is one of the, I'm going to erase one number just to show you. And this is going to tell me immediately that it's not valid anymore. Since it calculates the hash when you change one number, the hash is not going to be the same. And when I do the reverse process, it will never reach the same match. It won't match. So this is a process that you like to do when validating via the QR. Any variable that I change here is going to result in a false answer. So let's go back. If I change here, I don't know, any code, anything, if I want to change the date, let's say. And always have to make sure to use this process to validate the signature. And by doing this, I can validate if the data has been modified or not. You'll be able to find more definitions of the technical information about this so that you can experiment. There's enough formal decision, the way to do this. You just have to do the reverse process. So we implement this, we implement the resource, and this would be the final definition. You have any questions so far? Inquiries? Perfect. We don't have any questions. I'm going to show you when the signature is validated, which is this next step. This is see the verification. Someone with access to the key for the document can have access to this. And the data that are signed are the same data that had been written in the original, because the calculated hash coincides or matches with document hash. There's no definition on how to do this process in practice, but it does explain the steps required to sign and to decipher the signature. And by implementing this, we will be able to reach that proposal. It's also important to add that all of the data is based on two elements, the implementation guide that's in FAIR, and the other implementation, the technical guide, which is the one that I showed you. And it contains all the details of what we did. We tried to implement all of the elements, and our proposal was based on trying to comply with all of these elements. In case you want to modify it, or if you find anything, please copy the detail, copy the project, do a fork, and start your own line of development. We're going to update this project constantly within the next weeks to see if we can do some debugging or improving the process. What Fernando asked is that we can reach a decision to see what we do with the provenance, and it is for you to be able to give your next step, have your next step. And by doing this, we're complying with certain elements that were proposed in the beginning. We worked with, we used a data set, we installed a repository. In this presentation, we saw parts of the mission, and we also saw how to issue these certificates with a signature. So now we have to establish the next steps in order to have a more solid structure within the technical enablers. Thank you very much. Carlos, give the floor back to you. Thank you, Alejandro, for your presentation. Do you have any final questions? We have run out of time. I'm going to give you a reminder. All of these sessions are recorded and the presentations are going to be available in this webpage, www.raxel.org. In the courses, you can have access if you as guest. These training cycles give you access as a guest. There are other previous courses. If you want to have access, you can also request the creation of a profile, because since these were required before, they required of a registration. But there's a guest section, the one that we just saw from Alexander. You will have that information there from this presentation. It's going to be there available for all of you. So without any further ado, thank you very much for attending today. And on behalf of the PAHO and the BID and SENS, we wish you a great weekend, and we'll meet back again Friday 9th with this NOMAD session, and Tuesday 20th would be the tentative date of that second part with the new speakers. Thank you very much. Happy weekend.